Okay, welcome to Between the Verses, real talk, real faith. I'm Kelly LaVerne, and this space right here, this is where we slow things down and we take a real look at what's actually happening in Scripture beyond what we usually see at first glance. Not surface level, not rushed, but real. Because if we're being honest, a lot of us know the stories, but we don't always sit with them long enough to see how deeply they connect to our everyday lives. So that's what this is. This is where faith meets real life, right between the verses. And to start this podcast, we're beginning with a series called Eve's Drop. Yes, like eavesdrop. But this is intentional because in this series, we're leaning into the stories of the women of the Bible and really listening to what's happening beneath the surface, what they felt, what they faced, what wasn't always said directly, but was still there. Because when you really listen closely, you'll start to realize something. Their stories aren't that far from ours. So let's begin at the beginning. Let's talk about Eve, right? Most of us know the story about Adam and Eve, and I'm sure you read it a couple times or had it preached to you a couple times, but we're not going to talk about her in the usual way people talk about her. Not that she messed up everything and not the don't be like Eve version. No, we're talking about the real story. The one that feels a little bit too familiar, if we're honest, because girl, Eve's story, it's not just about her. We can all relate. If you really sit with it, her story, it's about influence, it's about identity, and it's about what happens when the wrong voice reaches you at the wrong moment or the right moment. But either way, whether it's right or wrong moment, it's the wrong voice. So let's get into it. Now, her story can be found in Genesis chapter 2, starting at verse 4, all the way through to chapter 3, verse 24. And I really want you to read it. I want you to go back and read it after this and see if you can see what I'm talking about. Like I said, I know you've heard it, you had it preached to you. You probably read it a couple times, but do yourself that favor. Go back and check it out. Because what we're talking about, it totally went over my head every time we talked about it. Okay. I'm just gonna be real. So let's get really into this. See, Eve had everything. Now, there might be some people that come across this that really don't know. Nothing wrong with that. Eve was the first woman. She was Adam's wife. God created her. Then she had everything. And I don't mean in a cute way, even though she had all that stuff too. I mean literally everything. She had peace. She had purpose. She had a direct relationship with God. She didn't have to worry about confusion. There was no comparison. There was no pressure. She didn't have to worry about keeping up with so and so and what sister so and so or mother so and so was going to think or say. She had everything. She had it going on from the head to the toe. Okay. We can imagine she was gorgeous. The garden was gorgeous. Okay. With her pure, clean, vibrant skin. Can you up? There was no pollution, no dirt, nothing. Okay, ladies, I'm trying to stress. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect, if you will. Her body was bang, bang, bam, if you will. Like I said, we're going to talk about real stuff. Eve had everything and she had it going on. She woke up already chosen. She woke up already loved. She woke up already enough. She came on the scene and stepped in like, yo, here I am. Just gorgeous. Like, can you imagine that? You wake up, you have everything. There's no insecurity. There's no second guessing, no wondering, am I doing enough? Am I enough? Am I good enough for Adam? Am I good enough for this garden? No, she had everything. She had to worry about that stuff that we sometimes deal with, ladies. I can't even imagine. So she didn't have to become anything. She already was. And what makes and that's what makes this happen next so real. Because even in a perfect environment, with everything she could have ever wanted, I can imagine her and Adam, there was no strife, no arguing. They got along, never no disagreements. Can you imagine that? But yet, still the wrong voice found her. And this is where it gets interesting because that wrong voice came from the serpent. It's in the Bible. And he didn't come to her loud. He didn't come at her aggressive or obvious or scary or creepy. A lot of us think the devil's going to come at us and we're going to be so frightened and shaking in our boots. No, that joker slid right up next to her and asked her a question. And he said, "Did God really say that?" We're talking about the tree. They were told not to eat from that tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So, see right there, that evil part, that would have been enough for me. But anyway, he slid right up next to her and was like, did God really say that? Because now Adam had the direct instructions, right? He got it directly from God what to do and what not to do. So, Eve might be questioning that. Wait a minute. Did God? But anyway, we need to catch this because this is how it happens today. It starts small. It doesn't start with outright rebellion. It starts subtle. It starts with a thought. It sounds like curiosity, but it's actually planting doubt. It makes you pause and reconsider what you already know. So Eve answered the question. And here's where it gets more interesting because when she responded, y'all, she said, "We can't eat or touch." Now, check this out. God never said anything about touching. We don't know where she got that part from, if she added it or that's what Adam told her. But it's subtle, but it matters. Because the moment you start listening, or excuse me, the moment you start adding to what God said, you create space for confusion, right? Confusion. And confusion is where deception gets comfortable. Confusion is where deception gets comfortable. Now, really, answering the question wasn't the problem. The problem was she stayed in the conversation. She could have easily said, "Well, yeah, God said that. Now, move on. Bye, boy." But she stayed in that conversation. And once the conversation kept going, the tone changed. Now, it just wasn't a question. It's a contradiction. Because the old joker responded, that slick, sly so and so. He said, "You will not surely die." He's telling her, "No, that ain't going to happen. You can get away with it." Right? Now, we talking about Eve. And then this part right here, he makes it sound like God is withholding something back from her. Like God doesn't want you to be like him. He doesn't want you to be smart. Doesn't want you to know things. You eat it, you're gonna have power, you're gonna be like God. Like all this nonsense. Again, she had everything. So what more could she think that God was holding back from her? But it started as a thought, right? And then suddenly it's not about obedience anymore. Now she's not thinking about, "I gotta obey God." She's like, "Well, what if there is more?" Have you ever stopped and said, "What if there is more?" Now, my question would be to her, like, "Girl, didn't you already have enough? What is the more?" I mean, think about it. We just explained how she came on the scene. What could possibly be the more, Eve? But, you know, she's had to start thinking. That's thinking. So she's like, maybe there is more. And now she's looking at the tree differently. That's where everything turned because she's looking at that tree. And now the Bible says that the tree looked good. It was pleasant. It was desirable. And here's the truth nobody says enough. She wasn't reaching for something bad. She was reaching for something that looked good. Now, ladies, we know that everything that looks good ain't always good for you. And yes, I did say ain't. Oh, it ain't always good for you. But it looked like something that would it like add something to her. The more she thought about it, it looked like it would make her better. If I could, oh, I could be better. I could be wiser. I could be more. And isn't that how it happens? But again, I don't know what more she was expecting. But anyway, it doesn't come looking wrong. It doesn't come looking scary. It comes looking beneficial. And here's the deep layer. The Bible breaks it down like this. That tree, it was good for food, it was pleasant to the eye, and desirable to make one wise. So that's physical, that's emotional, that's intellectual. So this wasn't random. It appealed to every part of her, and that's why it worked. And let me add this little detail, that people like to skip over sometimes. I mean, I've heard it, but sometimes people like to skip over it. And, when they talking, trying to blame Eve for everything. But Adam was right there. He wasn't far away. He wasn't clueless. And he said nothing. I'm not going to stay here long, but just hear me. Sometimes silence participates. And let's be real about something else. As I said, Adam had the direct instructions from God. So while Eve was being influenced, Adam was being silent. And that part hits a little different because it reminds you silence doesn't always mean agreement, but it can still create permission. The census is about the ladies. We'll move on. So she eats. He eats. He didn't have to, but he did. I don't know. Now, immediately, I ain't talking about next week, 5 minutes. Immediately, instantly, straightway, all the words that mean that very second, everything changes. But not the way she thought. Not into having more, not into some type of freedom, but into awareness. Now she became aware. Shame, covering, hiding. She went from openness to hiding from the very God they used to walk with. And here's the twist. The supposed promise, according to old Joker, was like, you'll be like God. But what she actually got was self consciousness, which played on her self esteem. She went and she hid. She realized she was naked. She became self conscious. That affected her self esteem because she had to go cover up. There was no elevation, it was exposure. Instead of becoming more powerful, they both became more aware of what they lacked. And I still don't understand that part because, like I said, they had everything, but they became aware of what they lacked and they went from connected to hiding. And then God shows up, right? And he asks one question. He says, where are you? Now, isn't that a strange question? God knows what happened. He says, where are you? And we know that God already knew where they were. If we're being real, he already knew. So why did he ask the question? It wasn't about location, it was about relationship. It was an invitation to come out of hiding and come back to me. And when God looked, hiding didn't look like trees, it looked like distance. They probably thought they could hide in the garden behind the trees and the bushes or whatever. But God, when, he looked, yeah, the trees were there, but he just saw the distance. That distance. Okay, let me keep going. I got to be careful, y'all. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. But if you don't know, I'm a teacher. That's where, I flow in. But this is not really a teaching session. It's a podcast. So I'm going to try to keep it going in that vein, okay? And not break out into full teacher mode. So pray for me, y'all. So come out of hiding, come back to me, let's get rid of this distance. Let's, stop avoiding me. Stop avoiding the truth. Stop avoiding accountability. And while I said that we can relate because some still do this, we still do this. We try to hide. We try to run from God. We avoid the truth. We want to avoid being accountability when we do something that we know we shouldn't have did. And, we can't run into a garden and hide, but we sometimes, we distract ourselves so we don't have to deal with what we already know. We get busy. And I mean, we get busy. So we can distract ourselves from what we already know. Okay, let's bring us a little closer to home because, like I said, this isn't just about Eve. This is that moment you knew better, but stayed in the conversation anyway. That situation that looked good, but felt a little off. That thought that didn't match what God told you, but you entertained it anyway. And slowly, what you knew started to shift. What you believe started to bend. And I'm not talking about the foundational principles. I'm just talking about things that, you knew you shouldn't be doing. Now it's starting to bend. And then before you realize it, you made a decision that didn't line up with who you really are. And then what happens? Not freedom, but confusion, distance, and maybe even a little shame. And the first instinct, just like Eve, is to hide. But here's the part that I love because even after all of that, God still came looking for her. God didn't disappear. God didn't withdraw. God didn't say, well, Eve, you messed that up. One and done. Bye, boo. No, that's not what God said. He asked, where are you? And then he covered them. See, they had tried to fix themselves like Eve. I can imagine, she can grab some twigs and some leaves and try to make a little cute outfit, but it wasn't enough. So God stepped in and did what they couldn't do. And here's the part people don't always say out loud. I didn't even realize it, right? But for them to be covered, because the Bible tells us that God covered them in skins, like he gave them some designer original fits, okay? Can you imagine having an outfit created by the creator himself? So he gave them some new skins, right? So they was on point now. But in order for him to get them skins, something had to die. Like I never thought about that. The skins had to come from one of the animals. The skin he used to make their clothes, that new sharp outfit, had to come from an animal. So that was the first sacrifice before systems, before the laws and the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments and the sacrifices. God was already showing that covering cost something. I did not get this. I did not see this in that scripture. But God was showing that covering costs something. So let me tell you the real takeaway, friend to friend. I know for some of you, we just met. It's okay. We friends now. Friend to friend. Eve's story is not just about messing up. And guess what? Neither is yours. Now, her story, it's about what happens when you listen to the wrong voice, how subtle influence can shift your thinking, and how quickly this looks good can override that God said no. I don't know about you, but been there, done that. Well, never mind. Don't shush because I already got the t shirt. Been there, done that. But more than that, more than that, I'm trying to keep this light and everything, but I want us to get this part. More than that, it's about what happens after because she didn't stop being chosen. She didn't stop having a purpose and she didn't stop being used by God. And the same applies to you, to me. Just because you mess up, make a bad choice, have a oops, make an disobedient move, it don't have to end. See, she just had to keep going, but now differently. And maybe, just maybe, that's where you might be at a point where you feel like God can't use you or you don't have a purpose anymore. You're not chosen because something you did. But that's that voice that I talked about earlier that's trying to tell you, mm, or is it that old, that old slick, sly serpent trying to tell you this? Remember that? Yeah. Anyway, so that's a voice. She had to keep going differently. But her identity didn't change. And we don't talk about this enough. See, Eve was still called the mother of all living. Let that sit. She wasn't renamed by her mistake. Her identity didn't change. Her purpose didn't disappear. And here's a detail that'll preach by itself. She wasn't even called Eve until after everything happened. Before that, she was just referred to as woman in the Bible. So her name, Eve, Eve, which translates to the mother of all living, came after the mistake, not before. Came after that act of disobedience, not before. All right, so before we go any further, I almost got into this a few minutes earlier, but I caught myself. Before we go any further, though, I have something that I need for us to do. I know I already said to go back and read about Eve, starting at Genesis 2, but I need for us to do something because now that we're friends, you're my girlfriend. I need you to understand we're not just hearers over here. We don't just hear things. We do, right? We're doers. We hear and we move. And so this is what I like to call your Monday move. You'll hear me refer to the Monday move. And for this Monday move, I want you to ask yourself one question. This don't have to be written down. It's nothing deep. Don't scroll past. But I just want you to ask yourself one question. What voice have you been listening to lately? We talked about the old sly serpent got in Eve's ear. What voice has been in your ear? And be honest. Not what you should be listening to, but actually what is influencing your thoughts. Now, is it fear? Are you listening to the voice of fear, the voice of doubt, comparison, the voice of the pressure to be more, do more, prove more? Right? What voice? Self consciousness, low self esteem? Is some old sly serpent whispering in your ear? And again, you don't have to report back to me. This is for you. I got to do my own. I got to answer my own questions, right? And then ask yourself, okay, I know it was one question, but consider this part B of the one question, or we could just call it two, whatever. But then ask yourself this: does this sound like God? Whatever voice you've been listening to, whatever's been in your ear and your thoughts, does it sound like God? Because if it doesn't, you might be in a conversation that you need to walk away from, seriously. And listen, you don't got to fix everything today. Just recognize it. That's the first step, right? Just recognize it, identify it, recognize it, and then decide. And then decide. So if I had to say it plainly in summary, Eve's story isn't about just a mistake. It's about influence. It's about identity. And it's about what happens when we forget what God already said. But it's also about this. Even when something goes wrong, God still calls you, still covers you, still meets you. So if you've been hiding, if you've been second guessing yourself, if you've been feeling a little off, He's still asking the same question. Where are you? And one thing I love about God, it's not to shame you, to condemn you, it's to bring you back to Him, right? So, see, we can learn some things from EVE. I told y'all her story ain't too far from ours. We try to make things deep, spiritual, mystical, like, it's off in some far off planet. Doesn't relate to us. But no, listen, did y'all know all this stuff about Eve? Come on here. Her story relates to us. And she messes up, we mess up. She found grace, found favor. God still used her. And the same applies to us. But all right, I'm going to leave it right there. Because if you really sit with just that, it'll meet you exactly where you are. And listen, if you're in a conversation you should have walked away from, you're not alone. But the good news is you can still walk away now. It's nothing stopping you. You can walk right away, shut that conversation down. Bye, boo. Click. Well, I don't know. We don't have to click anymore, but y'all get the point. See ya. All right. So until next time, I'm Kelly LaVerne. I'll be back soon, right here on Between the Verses. I can't wait to tell you about this next woman. See you soon.